people really connect with archetypes on a very deep level, because archetypes go to your soul level. What is your soul? What is it that you cannot do without? You have to do it, and it will keep nagging you.
Well, Jacqueline.
Oh, hi, Petra.
Hi, welcome back to The Red Hot Truth. This is your second time here, and we didn't quite get into the full juiciness of archetypes, and so we've welcomed you back, so it's exciting to be back, so welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me back. I love to be here.
Well, we've become friends now, so...
yeah, that's what can happen.
Today we're really speaking to that woman who's done the personal development journey, she's done the seminar, she's done the books, she's sort of looked to implement those things into her life, and is finding she's still not getting the results she wants. You know, something's still stopping her. She feels like she's still sabotaging herself. She's getting stuck in old patterns. It happens to so many of us, you know. And so today we're going to be discussing survival archetypes, which is so relevant because they are our core archetypes. And the intention of this interview is to sort of give women out there that a little bit of a glimpse into it, and say this is what it could be, and go delving and exploring into that a little bit. So that's really exciting. But for those women who have been sunning themselves in the Bahamas and haven't watched your first interview, can you please just tell us again, like, what are archetypes?
So archetypes, the name archetype comes from, it's a copy of an original. So you can see it as a template. And in psychological terms, it's a template for a whole personality in itself. So sometimes when we look at a person's quality, we do assessments, we can do personality profiles, we seem to be looking at one specific quality, let's say assertiveness, or we're looking at a preference of learning, which is, you know, something like, am I an introvert or an extrovert? So we're isolating one specific quality, and that's cool to know, but it doesn't give us the information why, you know, why am I assertive or why am I lacking assertiveness? Archetypes are describing a quality and a deeper motivation, and we only use one word. For example, the Queen is an archetype, and these archetypes have developed as part of our evolution. So we put the storyline in there. They have a very strong mythological connotation, and they convey the deeper motivation why we're doing things.
Yeah, it's so great because, like I said in the last interview, I have done so many profile tests, and I love them. Like, you know, learning more about myself is my greatest joy. But it still didn't sort of give me the language around who I really was. And when I did archetypes, it actually did give me language to say, yes, I am an intellectual, and therefore, you know, I'm really good at speaking and articulating and learning, you know, and I've got a seeker archetype, so that explains my love for learning. And it sort of really cemented that for me to make it okay. To make it okay to be who I am. Because even with those personality tests and profiles, I still felt unsure of who I was. Was it okay to be that way? Where archetypes went, this is a quality you have, and this is it. You know, and it was so wonderful for me to experience that. Yeah.
And I can relate to it, and I can relate to the story of women having done all the seminars and the personal growth, which I, you know, am also a person of. And then I got introduced to the concept of archetypes, which I've never heard about at that time. And I was in the middle of a transition period myself, and I knew myself, and I always connected very deeply to my purpose, and what I want to bring to this world. But when I actually did the work with archetypes, it developed such a level deeper, which I didn't expect at all. It really blew me. And there were aspects that I was very familiar with, that I knew. For example, I knew I had a seeker archetype, I had an alchemist and an artist. So this wasn't a surprise to me. But there were other archetypes that came out as I was doing the work that really blew me, and I didn't acknowledge them enough. And they were so powerful and in a way so easy and such a deep motivation for me that I never really sort of looked at them that they were really special.
Yeah.
And so people really connect with archetypes on a very deep level, because archetypes go to your soul level. What is your soul? What is it that you cannot do without? You have to do it, and it will keep nagging you. For example, if you are an artist, you can put it on hold for a while, and sometimes we have other priorities. And this is fair enough, we live life and we have to be pragmatic about life, but there is this little nagging voice that says, oh, I'd love to paint, but I don't have the time. So archetypes will keep pushing you, and then at some point, hopefully, you will find the time and integrate it into your life. And yeah.
Well, that's so interesting, because exactly, and then when you do have that nagging voice or that feeling, sometimes we just don't know what that's about. And the beautiful thing about archetypes is you can then look at your archetypes and go, oh, if I've had this nagging to paint or to express myself creatively, then I've got the artist archetype, for example, and that makes sense to me now. And now I know what to do with that.
Yeah.
So sometimes, as you said, we don't know what that nagging is, but it is like the soul's calling.
It is.
And and we delve more into that in the first interview, so definitely go and check it out. That's like a great interview. And we'll put the link as well in there, so that explains it a little bit more. Today we're looking at survival archetypes, and I want to refer to your book. Now that I throw the whole pile down, let me refer to this book. So you've written a book called The Free Spirit of Your Life's Purpose, and here on page 56 you talk about the survival archetypes, and I'll just read from the book, and it says, the survival archetypes don't just resolve around sabotaging you and making life difficult. To the contrary, at their core, they challenge us to develop more stamina, faith in ourselves, and set healthy boundaries when interacting with others. So while they can act out in survival mode, they can help you accelerate your life in the direction that is most aligned with who you are. And so, can you tell us a little bit more about what the purpose of survival archetypes is?
Well, maybe I start with that all archetypes have a light and a shadow side.
Yes.
And so have the survival archetypes. And the survival archetypes the connotation might sound negative at first, because survival, but that's not true. So all archetypes have a light and a shadow side. The light side is when you operate out of pure empowerment. You love what you're doing, you're in the flow, and this is the light side. So you bring out the best in yourself. But there's also, we live in a paradoxical world, or in a world which has these polarities of light and dark, and then there is the dark side, and the dark side is the side when we have to discover who we are, something that's unknown about us, something that might elicit fear. It might trigger fear because we don't know it. As human beings, we sometimes like to find ways around it because it's kind of not a very comfortable feeling.
Yeah.
But the shadow is not bad. It is just what it is. It's the world we live in. And the shadow, I see it like a jumping board to the light. So you jump onto the shadow so you can jump back into the light. And the survival archetypes are the ones that bring it out the most in us. So the survival archetypes are the ones that are triggered within the first 4 years of our life, through childhood. When we face situations where we encounter something that we don't know about, something that might threaten us, that is perceived as a fear, and we have a certain method or pattern of addressing it. And it is unique in all of us. So we all follow a very similar pattern when we are faced with fear, when we are threatened, when something seems to be overwhelming for us. So a lot of us, we can't remember the first years of our childhood, but this is the time where all 4 survival archetypes would have shown up, would have been triggered, and would have already developed a pattern that stays with us through life.
I know, that's why we have to go to counselling. So I just want to backtrack a little bit to the shadow and the light, because we really do, I find, live in a society at the moment, and especially in the personal development space, where there's this constant emphasis on feeling good, fighting the fear, grinding through it, you know, all that stuff that they say. And yet, as you mentioned, there is the universal law of polarity. So one can literally not exist without the other. So in order to know light, you have to know dark. In order to know love, you have to know hate. And so they never exist without each other, and that's a yin-yang effect. And so it's really important to acknowledge when we discuss these things that both of them have a very clear purpose. And that it's important to embrace both of them, and just to acknowledge their purpose in helping us live purposeful lives. And so when we discuss these things, it's really, I encourage the audience not to think of one as bad or one as good, just as what it is what it is. Right? And I think, because otherwise that resistance comes up and we want to shut it off. And I know for myself, right? Like, shadow, like, what are you talking about? I just see rainbows. But let's really focus on the purpose of what they're there for, and how we can use them to live a purposeful life. The first one is called the Saboteur. And of course, like the name suggests, on page 57, you give a really, really good description of it. And you say, the Saboteur archetype may be the one most intimately connected with your ability to survive in this physical world. So why is this the one that seems to be most connected to our survival instincts?
Well, in a way, all of us are, all of the 4 survival archetypes are, but the saboteur is the one, we can also call it the agent of change. So it shows up when change is on the horizon, and it can be a positive change. It can be, the promotion to a new job. It can be falling in love. And there is a certain physicality around this archetype. So when we then encounter that we have a lack of self-belief in this new role right now, what then happens is that we might freeze, or we might get shaky legs, or the heart rate goes up, and we all of a sudden we're totally stifled and we can't go for the new role. And that's why it is such a physical archetype.
It's funny when you say that, because I remember the first time I went for my driver's license test and I learned how to drive with a manual. And I was so nervous that my foot would not stop shaking off the clutch, and the car was doing this. So would that be like the Saboteur archetype coming into action?
Yeah. In the Saboteur archetype, the shadow the shadow side of the Saboteur is the lack of self-belief. And then once that kicks in, it is a very physical mechanism that's triggered in the brain, and it sort of gives this reaction. And when you want to sort of snap out of the saboteur, you have to also use a physical approach.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so talking yourself out of it in your mind isn't going to work. And I've experienced it myself.
That's interesting.
Let's say you sit in an interview scenario, an exam, you're really prepared, you're really good, and all of a sudden you have this, and I've had this, this blank. Oh my God, and I can't think. Obviously, at this time, I didn't know about the saboteur archetype and what to do. But what you got to do is, because you're locked into a physical reaction, you have to unlock it physically. So one thing is breathing. The first thing is really breathing, deep breathing, and then moving, just shaking your body, moving. And when you're in an interview or in an exam, you can move around, you can move your body. And just give it 1 or 2 seconds, and you can actually virtually snap out of this lock.
I'm just visualizing myself in an interview getting struck by the saboteur, going, give me a second, I'm doing like burpees or jumping. And they're like, what is going on?
But you can, you can move in your chair, and you can give yourself a couple of seconds. This will break this pattern.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting, because the thought then brings an emotion, doesn't it? And it sits there, and to try and think yourself out of that emotion, as you said, doesn't work. So you have to physically move yourself out of it, right?
Yeah.
It's so interesting. So is the saboteur's role to keep us safe?
Absolutely not. None of them are. So when you look at the soul is not wanting to keep yourself. The soul wants to develop, and the ego or the logical mind wants to stay safe. So there's a little bit of a conflict there.
Oh, say it again. Yeah. Oh, you have to explain it to me. Because it's interesting that you say that, because often, once again, this war on fear and comfort zone and all of that. But the soul, then so when you say the soul wants us to grow, does that mean we were born to expand?
We are born to expand, and that's seen in everywhere in life, whether you look at plants, whether you look at psychological development. We are born to expand, and expansion is uncomfortable. So I also refer to it as, let's say, you work out with a personal trainer. You have a specific goal, whether you want to become fit or more toned. And is it a comfortable road? No, it isn't. And it's the same with our journey and our soul journey. The soul doesn't care whether you have to, change city, whether you have to start or want to start a new job, and that's scary for you. No, the soul sees the expansion. This is the next best role for you. This is giving you a huge opportunity. And then the ego comes in, or the logical mind, which is connected to the ego, and said, oh, no, you have to change jobs. This is really uncomfortable and unsafe. And people will now see you as a leader. You have to perform as a leader. And all these thoughts come in, which can be endless, to talk you out of it. And the soul says, no, this is your path.
And that's really where I feel the unhappiness really comes in. That stagnation is really that's when the soul's going, you need to go. And that's where the real uncomfortability comes in, is when we don't move with the soul. So how does the saboteur then help us in the light to move with the change?
Well, as much as this strong energy can push us back, you can go through a mental exercise where I go through an exercise where I look at my saboteur like a little person, and you can use this energy, and you can prep yourself beforehand that this energy is pushing you through versus pushing you back. For example, I've had a situation in my life years ago where I was preparing for a new role. And I wanted, to move a step up and become the greater and better leader. And then, 2 weeks later, the company actually had this role for me, which was completely unexpected. And my initial reaction was, oh my God, I have to think about it. No, actually I didn't, because I thought through it.
Because you wanted it.
Because I wanted it.
Yes.
And at the time, again, I didn't kind of know about these type of saboteural energies, but I did switch very quickly, and I thought, no, this is my job, I'm going for it. So this is how you can then use this energy to propel you forward. And the way you do this, you have to first understand your saboteur. And with all archetypes, it comes with a little voice in your head, and you will know what the saboteur is telling you.
Yeah.
So become familiar with your saboteur and your pattern, so you can then actually prep yourself. You can't prep yourself for everything in life that's thrown at you, because that's life. But it is like a training course. You can become stronger in addressing it, and it's hugely empowering. You know, when you take this step forward, but you have to face it. You just have to face the fear in this moment, and also understand that the other side of fear is the light side. You just got to go through it. It's like walking through a river, and on the other side it's dry. So you just got to do it. You can't fake it, but it's hugely empowering.
Yeah, you've got some really great exercises in the book where, you know, you ask some poignant questions where people can start looking at their patterns and where the saboteur is coming into their life, so they can identify where that's playing out, because awareness, of course, is the first step. So, you know, in the book you do have some really excellent questions. So another archetype which I think many women in particular can relate to is called the victim archetype, and I particularly like this one because it relates to our relationship with power and setting boundaries. And why I really like this one is because as women in the past, we have been taught to be victims, right? The damsel in the stress, so that the prince can rescue us, because really that was our survival, right? We needed a man to marry us so we could have money and a life, right? So that's really interesting. But with women's liberation now, and with us becoming more and more self-sufficient, now we need to start paying a bit more attention to this victim archetype, so we don't play the victim. Once again, there is a shadow and there is a light. And I did want to read on page 64 here about the victim archetype, and you say, the victim archetype may initially manifest itself when you do not get what you want or need, are abused by a playmate, sibling, or teacher, or are accused of or are punished for something you did not do. You may suppress your outrage at the injustice if the victimizer is bigger and more powerful than you. And just reading that made me think, well, all of us have experienced that at some stage in our life, right? So tell us more about the victim archetype and how that plays out in our life.
Yeah, the victim archetypes is appealing to our most vulnerable side, and most people hate the victim archetype. They do not like to identify with the victim, because being a victim is a very uncomfortable position, and that's the first thought we have when we think about victim, and that's true. It is appealing on that notion that something is happening to us that we cannot influence, and it makes us feel very uncomfortable, to say the least. And we all have experienced it. And we all have victimized others in some form. Yes, the victim is also called the guardian of boundaries. And it teaches you to set your boundaries with another person in such a way that you can say what's coming in from the outside. So a strong victim, and there is such a thing as a strong victim, is very much clear on their boundaries, and you are not going to muck around with this person. They have set their boundaries clear. And they will display a certain strength. So there is a lot of strength in the victim as well. And these boundaries are not only boundaries from the outside in, it's also from the inside out. And that's the thing that people sometimes don't
that to me. What does the inside out mean?
Is if you don't want to let all your feelings come out to the outside world, as in, let's say, things like you're really upset and you're throwing a temper tantrum, which, you know, can be seen not only in 5-year-olds, in adults as well. And I call that, you know, is playing the victim card, because we know we all get a little bit attention when we play the victim card, as in saying, this has happened to me, and you know, you have the pity party. And in a way it's okay, you know, but you don't want to really let it out big time. And we all have seen it. I've seen it in the corporate world. It's very embarrassing to see it. When somebody does it, and obviously I've never done it.
You've never thrown your toys at the cot, as they say.
Never.
Well, you've got German in you, right? German's supposed to be reserved. Isn't that the generalisation?
Yeah, they are a little bit. Yeah, so that's the boundary, from the inside out.
And so, I mean, just thinking about that, that's sort of what's coming up for me there is having emotional intelligence around that. Like, really stopping for a second and noticing what the emotion is about, and then saying, hang on, this is not how I want to behave. And having that, that real clear understanding of who you are and how you want to behave. And that's, really a great way to go about it. Just coming to boundaries, though, from my own personal experience and also from the women in my life and around me, I've noticed that we really struggle to set boundaries. We struggle to say no. We struggle to say, is this going to work for me? So how is the victim archetype playing out in those scenarios?
So one way of looking at it is that if you sell yourself short, if you don't take the most empowering route, or if you are pleasing other people, then there is something in it for you. So whether it keeps you safe, whether you think, okay, I'm pleasing the other person, so I get something back in return, and this is kind of what's happening behind the scenes. And the way to then act in a more empowering way is really being intentional about it. It's not going to be feeling comfortable to say no, but there is a huge difference between feeling uncomfortable or discomfort and dislike. You don't want to go into a direction or be with a person or that you dislike. That's not, but feeling uncomfortable or feeling some form of discomfort is okay. And you got to go through it and then for the first time say, no, I think that doesn't work for me. And it may feel uncomfortable the first few seconds, and then it feels really empowering because you think, oh my God, I've said it, I've done it. And then you switch, zip it, and you zip it, and you wait what the other person says. You will be astounded. They say, okay, yeah, I get it. You will be astounded how people react. They don't always react in a negative way, but they can. As I said earlier, it's like doing a training program. You just have to train a muscle. You start with a low weight, and then you slowly increase the weight, and you become more and more empowered.
Yes, I love that, because I think the trick is to start small. Anything from being in a coffee shop, when they offer you something, or you just start really small where the consequence is not huge, right? And you do build up that muscle. And I've learned that being a self-proclaimed people pleaser, I have to understand where that comes from, and I do. And then just giving it a go and seeing nothing's happened. Like the world hasn't ended. No, I'm still okay. And just testing it out a little bit is really awesome. And definitely, the exercise in the book, I think, is really good. Once again, to just see where that victim plays out, because once again, having the language around that and knowing what's going on stops us from resenting ourselves. Because how often do we walk away and we go, oh, damn it,
done
I
it
should have said
again.
no, I'm such an idiot. And it stops that spiral, just going, hey, that's the victim archetype, and that's cool. Even if we just start there, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And people will respect you for it.
And you will respect yourself for it too. There's nothing, for me, there's nothing worse for me than hating myself. And also then I start resenting that person because I didn't say no.
Yeah.
Right? That's bad for relationships. How does my husband stick around? Actually, my husband's the one person I feel really comfortable saying no to. No. If you have a spouse, practice on your spouse. It works wonders.
That's really good, yeah.
Third archetype we're talking about now is the prostitute, and every time I think of the prostitute, I have to think of Pretty Woman.
Oh, yeah, of
Julia
course.
Roberts.
Yeah.
She was a classy prostitute. Of course, I would be a classy prostitute.
We all would be classy prostitutes.
So on page 69,
Oh, right, yeah.
you remember 69
Yeah,
as
I
well?
do, perfectly.
Yeah.
It's about the prostitute.
Yeah. It's about the prostitute, fancy that. So it says, the prostitute can seduce you to sell out your vision to the highest bidder in return for security. On the other hand, the prostitute can also keep you on the right path no matter what. So let's look at first about how the prostitute can seduce you to sell out your vision to the highest bidder in return for security. And once again, I think this is just ingrained in us how important security is to us as women, because in the past we really weren't able to look after ourselves and our own security. And it may seem like so long ago, and that leaves are attacking me. But it may seem like so long ago, but even if you think of your mother's generation and my mother's generation, you know, even then, they weren't really able to follow their own passions. They only, if they had a career, it was a teacher or a nurse or a secretary. So that security piece is ingrained through us through generations. So how does the prostitute work in our lives when we sell out for security? How do we identify when we're doing it?
Yeah, and security is such a big one, because it's part of our whole evolution to stay secure. It just plays out everywhere, you know, whether you want to stay in a job because it feels comfortable, you have your paycheck coming in, but you're not really happy, and how many people are in jobs that they think they're not happy, and it really slowly chips away their power, and sometimes you don't even notice how much it chips away because it goes so gradually. And then you become sort of a little bit dull, and you don't really notice it.
Can I just give you a perfect example?
Yeah.
I was thinking of this, you know, I had a very dear friend, and by somehow she studied business, really like always a very hard worker. Parents instilled in her, you have to work hard, right? So got really good marks in everything she did, studied business, went into an industry that she didn't like for security. Has been in that industry for 20 years, hates it, absolutely hates it. Every time she comes home, she works long hours because of her work ethic, okay, but there's so much attached to that. But comes home and all she does is complain about work, hates it, sits there, is miserable, will drink wine, complaining. But then what does she do on the weekend? Because she's so tired and exhausted, because when you're not living your truth, you're exhausted.
Yeah.
All she can do is clean the house and go shopping, right? And then until the next Monday, Saturday night comes, hating looking forward to Monday, and eventually she's just this no, she's not a horrible person, but it's uncomfortable for me to hang out with her because she's a nothing person, if I can say that. She's got no light, and so all she does is work and complain about work, and that's it. So that prostitute archetype in the shadow has really chipped away who she is.
Yeah.
And I've encouraged her in so many ways to step out of that, but she's so in the darkness that she can't, in the shadow, she can't see the light at the moment for herself.
And that's a really good example. It also shows sort of that we think we are so not able, or we can't see the way out. And the way out could be, you know, just starting to make a plan, taking small steps towards a new goal. And sometimes people get totally overwhelmed. They're stuck in a situation and they virtually cannot see the way out. And the way out is not usually, or it doesn't have to be one gigantic scary step. As I said, it can, you know, starts with a plan. If you already have a plan in place, how you can, you know, you start looking for a new job, you make yourself knowledgeable of what's out there, and you start the process and you put actions in place, it is already empowering. And just having a plan and starting with small steps is already putting life energy back into people.
Yeah.
And it's just that we sometimes get very overwhelmed and stuck. And there is, you know, with the prostitute there is a light side, and the light side is that the prostitute actually keeps you on track. If you commit to something, you know, you can say, oh, okay, I commit to my security, and you know, I stay in this job. That is a commitment to staying secure. Fair enough. No, well, maybe not fair enough. The prostitute will keep you there. But you can also say, okay, I've now made a commitment, that I've put a plan into place so I can introduce changes, and the prostitute will keep you on track, because the prostitute is a good negotiator. I love that about the prostitute, and it's always good to know. I say it's always good to know your price. Where is it? Where's your boundary? How far would you go?
So when we talk about knowing your price, that's not just money price.
No.
Tell us more, what else can the price be for us?
Well, we have already touched base on it. Like, you actually lose your enthusiasm for life, or you can lose it, your passion, your drive, your energy. And people, you know, ultimately can become sick. You know, it just chips away over years. And if you sell yourself short, you stay in something that is just really oppressing you, that's not who you are.
Yes.
People get all sorts of physical challenges as well.
And so what I encourage you to do when you're feeling stuck, just think of Pretty Woman and how Julia Roberts didn't settle for anything less than, was it Richard Gere?
Yeah.
It was Richard Gere.
It was Richard Gere.
Richard Gere, who was very hunky in his time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
He was the white and shining knight.
Of the 90s. Was it the 90s?
90s, yeah.
90s.
I think so, yeah.
So don't settle for anything less than Richard Gere in the 90s.
And in an absurd way, this was the prostitute telling her, you know, you don't settle for less. This is what we're in for,
right?
isn't it? It's again the prostitute.
And so the way I don't get hung up on the shadow side of the prostitute is when I think of something like Pretty Woman. You know, I try to put a bit of fun back into it, because it can, if we start thinking about selling ourselves short, then, you know, once again, that gives us a reason to do a bit of self-loathing. But if we go, you know, I'm Julia Roberts and I've got some stuff going on here, you know, I've got the goods. And it's really nice. The fourth survival archetype is the child archetype. And it was so interesting, as I was preparing for this interview, I was reflecting on the child archetype. And I remember reading research on, you know, this is it, right? You sit outside, and if it's not planes, it's birds. And I was reflecting on the child archetype, and I remember reading this research of them studying criminals, like hardcore, intense criminals. There's a point to the story. Jacqueline's face is like, where is she going with this?
Here, but yeah.
No, it's really interesting. And so those people who have done massacres and, like, you know, who've gone out on killing sprees, and what they found was a commonality between them was that they weren't allowed to play as children. So they were punished when playing, they were punished when experimenting. So they never had their chance to learn through play. And that was one of the common factors. And it's so interesting, because in the world of innovation we live in now, and innovation is the hot topic of the moment, but to innovate you have to play, you have to experiment. And once again, this war against failure, but failure is experimentation, right? And so many of us as adults have lost this beautiful child archetype of playing, of creating, of experimenting. And that's why our life has become like Groundhog Day. It's just this monotony of boringness, right? Isn't it? Like, so many people experience that. So tell us more about the child archetype and how we can use it to just zhuzh up our life again.
Yeah, that's so true about the child. I mean, we are learning through playing, full stop, and we've been sort of trained throughout our life here in this society that we go to school, we sit there, and there's a certain method of learning.
Yeah.
And while it may work for some people or for some children, in general it's not exploring all avenues. So, and then we do become adults and we think, oh, we're adults now, you know, play time is over, this is for children. But really using our imagination and being playful ourselves is enhancing innovation. It's at the core of innovation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have created this concept about success and failure. But we're also starting to see that failing is one step towards success. Where failing has a negative connotation, maybe we should completely exchange this word to something else.
I think so. I think it's experimentation.
Yeah.
So we're just experimenting. We're just playing.
And the thing is, the way I also see it with failure is, if you know something doesn't work the way you intended to, you have new information, you know it doesn't work, well, move on to the next.
And the interesting thing about failure is only when it doesn't give you the results you thought it would yield. But that doesn't mean it's the wrong result, it just means you didn't get the result you thought would be right. And so let's see it as a playful thing, right?
And even though we are now adults, the child archetype is still there, and we have a very strong connotation to the child archetype. As soon as we see children, you know, we really love them, we love their innocence and their playfulness, and we kind of get captured in it. But then for us in our life, we start to forget about it once we become adults.
And we're so much more forgiving of children.
Yeah,
right?
we are.
Oh, it fell over, you knocked the glass over, broke the house down, whatever, you burnt it down, fine, it was an accident. But then when it's an adult, it's like be arrested for arson, right? So
that's
that's
true.
true, right?
Yeah,
I just want to read something here on page 73 of the book, and you said something so profound, which I think really relates to the adult and the child, like combining the adult and the child. And you say, if we can consciously communicate with and love our inner child, we can intuitively tune into the energy while simultaneously being rooted in mature understanding of how we can create our reality. So can you explain that a little bit to us?
So the child is about the imagination, and also the child archetype is also about learning to become responsible, but at the same time keeping the innocent, keeping a level of innocence. Yeah, so often when we do become adults, we think, okay, childhood is over, and with that is over the imagination and the playfulness. But we actually need this to develop and create our world, because the thought comes first. If we want to build a house, we have to imagine it first before we put it onto paper and then start building it. So we're starting to chip away this really amazingly strong energy that we have, and that is creation, and we don't really allow us to go there and just do daydreaming. Daydreaming is so important, and even some companies are rediscovering daydreaming and rediscovering how important it is to take some time out during the day, maybe even several sort of time slots where you actually just daydream with no responsibility whatsoever.
Yeah, and so two things I want to add to that is, first of all, we don't allow ourselves to daydream because we're constantly busy, right? So if we're walking, we got the headphones in our ears, you know, anything, like we're constantly on the phone, like we never sort of take the time to just sit and then daydream. And so that's one to be really conscious of. Time out, like your brain needs some time out, right? And secondly, I did once again read research where there was a company that every week allocated half an hour to their employees to work on dream time. They actually hired a dream coach. So say half an hour, you've got time to work on dreams, you develop your dreams, let's see what you're dreaming of, and go and see this coach and you can work on it. They said their productivity went through the roof because they said the imagination started flowing, the innovation started flowing. So seriously understood the importance of dreaming. And that just shows you how that dream time can really lead to being more productive, if that's what, you know, you're interested in life, right?
Yeah, we have subscribed in this society to what I call the god of productivity.
Yes.
So if we don't directly see a connection between what I'm doing and what my output is, then this is not good. So just sitting there and dreaming, what's your output? So for companies, and I acknowledge them when they do this, allowing their people to have some creative time and even some dream time, which is really awesome. It also for them, they have to take a leap of faith.
Yes.
But it can be managed, and I've also worked in a company where we allowed employees to work on anything that they really found interesting, and we had so many amazing projects that came out of as a result of it, ideas and great functionalities that we could add to something. But it takes a little bit of a leap of faith, because we're so connected to, we have to produce something, and it has to be visible, and it has to look in
measurable.
Measurable, and
yes. And that just kills creativity, doesn't it? Not everything's measurable.
And it's not, I'm not saying this is wrong, but it's the balance, balancing it. Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you to really, and my favorite question of all time. Well, three actually, now that I think about it. First of all, what does self-love mean to you?
I think you need, we are here in this, on this plane playing field to develop our soul, to really learn about us, to apply us in some form of a service to this whole development. So for me, self-love is really understanding, who am I? What's my place in here? What is my contribution to this world? And allowing myself to live it. Enjoying it.
That's wonderful. For the audience, if they want to get hold of you, how can they get hold of you?
Well, obviously I have a website, nhedwana.com.au.
We'll put the link.
And on Facebook and on LinkedIn, I have regular little videos on LinkedIn. I also have a YouTube channel where you can find out a little bit more about archetypes as well.
Great, and of course we've got this fabulous book, The Free Spirit of Your Life's Purpose. Thank you very much. So come get it. I mean, I've read a few sections in here, but it's a really practical book if you want to get started on archetypes.
This book, it tells you all what archetypes are, so the concept about archetypes, and what they mean, how they apply to your life. And then you can also identify with the help of the book your archetypes, which people usually find very fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And my favorite question, what is your red hot truth and how are you living it?
So for me personally in my life, fear is a big topic. It's not that I would say I'm a fearful person. I've done a lot of things that do require courage, but courage is there when you have to overcome fear. And I see fear a lot, fear and anxiety in this society. So I had a lot of learning lessons personally about discovering my inner fears and overcoming them. And for me, it's really about the overcoming and not being really sucked into this energy of fear and not living your life. And that's what I want to bring into this world and help people to see that there is a whole other light at the other end of fear. And in this society, I find we have too much fear.
Well, thank you. That's very interesting. Watch this space. So totally get hold of Jacqueline. Once again, this program is about you living your red hot truth, and archetypes is a wonderful way to tap back into who you really are. So check out the book, check out her website, and go and live your red hot truth and find true happiness. Jacqueline, thank you again for coming.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Always a pleasure to be here.
Hello, fabulous woman on fire. I trust that this interview helped you get closer to your red hot truth. So give it a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe. Thank you for supporting the Red Hot Truth, and we'll see you next time.